Hello and thank you for joining me. This is the third and last video in a series of videos in which we've dealt with Simon Peter's great failure, his denial of the Lord, and his subsequent recovery by Jesus. Our lesson text is John chapter 21. We'll read several verses there in that chapter, John chapter 21. Now, Simon Peter, he loved Jesus, but he had a problem with pride and self-sufficiency. These limited his potential usefulness, the usefulness of his life by the Lord. Peter was a hindrance to his brethren rather than a help. He was confident in himself that he could never be shaken from his loyalty in Jesus. Peter's philosophy was, when I am strong, then I am strong, and I am strong. Jesus warned him, but he didn't take counsel. And I think of some words that the Lord spoke to him in the Garden of Gethsemane. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. I understand those words. Peter was going to have to learn some things the hard way, as we often do. Satan, as we saw in our last video, tossed up a big black cloud of fear and intimidation, and Peter, fearing for his life, did the unthinkable. What was to him unthinkable at one point anyway, he denied any association with Jesus. He did so 3 times. In the courtyard of the high priest's compound, while the Lord was being shamefully mistreated by others, by haters, someone put the finger on Peter, said, surely this guy, he is part of Jesus' crew because he's a Galilean. His speech gives him away. Under duress, Peter began to curse and swear. We read of this in Matthew's account. And he said, dude, I don't know what you're talking about. Before the words got out of his mouth, the rooster crowed. So we read in our last video in Luke chapter 22, verses 61 and 62, and the Lord turned. Now this was when Peter denied any knowledge, any association with the Lord for the 3rd time. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. A look of love and concern. He knew Peter was going to a dark place for a while. And Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said to him, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. So Peter went out and wept bitterly, those hot, scalding tears. And so here he was. It was like, oh my God, no. What have I done? Now we try to get into Peter's head. He's thinking, what a worthless piece of trash I am. I just threw away my life. I denied my Lord. I'm so ashamed. Probably I'm not even saved. Certainly I am disqualified from any further usefulness by God. And of course some dark days followed. Yet so often those things that might seem to disqualify a child of God from useful service, useful Christian service, for example, some great failure, these things end up being used by God to qualify us for service. So far from disqualifying him for useful service, Peter's great failure, God used it to make him a vessel fit for the master's use. Peter's failure broke him of pride, self-sufficiency, and self-reliance, so that he later could go on to write, this is in 1 Peter chapter 1, Peter wrote how that we are kept by the power of God, obviously not by our own power. So Peter became a recovered failure. The Bible is full, by the way, of examples of recovered failures. Most of the great heroes of faith, we call them heroes of faith, of whom we read in Hebrews chapter 11, were guilty of some great failures and were subsequently recovered by the Lord. In the balance of this lesson, we look at the Lord's recovery of Peter and his restoration to usefulness. Now, at some point after his denial of the Lord, his failure, Peter recovered enough to join with the other apostles. Now, they were in hiding, they were afraid, and by the way, they had no expectation after the Lord was crucified, suffered horribly and was crucified. The apostles had no expectation that he would rise from the dead. Even though Jesus had repeatedly told them that he would, they didn't get it. Which is really interesting. There's some great theology here. If we believe that the apostles were spiritually saved men, and they were, then clearly they were not saved by believing specifics of the death, entombment, and resurrection of the Lord. So Peter had recovered enough to join with the other apostles in hiding. I suspect that he was pretty quiet. Now on resurrection morning, to a group of women who came to the Lord's tomb, and they came looking for a body. They had no expectation that the Lord would rise from the dead. Angels appeared to them and said to them at one point, "But go tell his disciples and Peter." Now this is Mark 16 verse 7. "Tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you into Galilee." This is the risen Lord. "There you will see him as he said to you." The Apostle Paul mentioned a private post-resurrection appearance of Jesus to Peter. This is in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 5. And there Paul refers to Peter by his Aramaic name, Cephas. Luke chapter 24 and verse 36 as well, a mention is made that the Lord had appeared to Simon, a post-resurrection appearance. So a meeting occurred. Now we're not given any details of what was said, but we can speculate. The Lord assured Peter, "Son, I love you, and I still have great plans for you." So this brings us to where we're going to read in this lesson. This is John chapter 21. I'll begin by reading verses 1 through 3, and then we'll skip ahead a little bit. John chapter 21 and verse 1. "After these things, Jesus," now this is again post-resurrection, "Jesus showed himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias," the Sea of Galilee, "and in this way he showed himself. Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee," these were James and John, "and two others of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, 'I am going fishing.' They said to him, 'We are going with you also.' They went out and immediately got into the boat, and that night they caught nothing." All right, so you recall that Jesus had called the fishermen away from their old occupation in order that they might receive training from him and be occupied with his work. And I think it is significant as we go back and we just consider briefly the Lord's call of the fishermen away from their old occupations. The Lord used those words, "from this point on." In other words, I've called you to focus your attention to occupy yourselves with my work from this point on. In other words, let's say it this way, the call to the ministry is a call to, well, it is a change. It is a change in focus. It is a change in direction, in occupation. And so life is not to continue business as usual. So that's happening a lot in our time, in which men announce that the Lord has called them to do the work of the ministry of his word. And I do stress work, the work of the ministry of the word. It is work. But men who announce or claim that they have been called, their lives go on business as usual. So we don't find that in the scriptures. Now, I take Peter's words, "I am going fishing," to mean that he had decided to go back to his old life. Well, why? He felt himself unqualified to be used any longer by the Lord. Though I'm sure that Jesus had reassured Peter that he had forgiven him and that he had great plans for him yet, Peter had to have been eaten up with guilt. Peter continued to influence the others. 6 others said to him, "We might as well go with you back into fishing as well." So in the following sequence of things, we have Jesus appearing to his men. And really what we have is we have Jesus chasing down and recovering a group of backslidden preachers. That's exactly what happened. And I don't think it was the first time that he did that. I think that we can make a case that when the Lord first called the fishermen to follow him, they followed him for a while, and then they went back to their fishing, and Jesus had to chase them down and recover them again. But anyway, that's for a different lesson. So let's skip ahead to John chapter 21 in verses 15 through 19. So, when they had eaten breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, now this was all very public, it was out in the open what we're reading. "Simon, son of Jonah, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Feed my lambs." Now we would understand that bottle feed my baby lambs, bottle feed baby Christians. Verse 16, Jesus said to him again the second time, "Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend my sheep," literally pasture my mature sheep. Pasture mature believers. Pasture them. Feed them. Verse 17, he said to him the third time, "Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." Now we don't see this in our English Bibles, but there are different words used here. And in this case, it would be bottle feed my mature sheep, kind of like bottle feed my people, my children, who should have grown up spiritually, but they haven't. Now, verse 18, we'll read a couple of more verses. "Most assuredly, I say to you, when you were younger, you girded yourself and walked where you wished, but when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will gird you and carry you where you do not wish." This he spoke, signifying by what death he would glorify God. And when he had spoken this, Jesus said to Peter, "Follow me." And he didn't say please. He said, "Follow me." So again, this was all out in the open and in the hearing of the other disciples that were present. And it seemed like almost, well, Jesus, was he trying to embarrass Peter? Was he trying to humiliate him? Well, no, that was not what this was about at all. But there were some things that needed to be out in the open. So, "Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these?" And obvious question, who are these? Well, we have one of two choices, and maybe a combination. So, was the Lord referencing Peter's fishing equipment, which represented his old occupation? "Peter, do you love me more than the boat and the nets and the fish?" Or was the Lord referencing Peter's fellow disciples? Well, we really don't get any help from language, but probably the reference was to the fellow disciples. Now, you remember Peter had as much as said, Lord, I love you more than these other guys. Now, there are two different verbs that are used, two different verbs for love that are used. We see them in the Greek New Testament text. We don't see them in our English Bibles. Jesus, in the first two questions, he used the verb agapao, which was the word for the high, holy, sacrificial, let's say the supreme or superlative love of God. Peter, in his response, used a different verb. Peter used the verb phileo, which was the verb of friendship. And so we have Peter responding, Lord, I have affections, I have feelings for you. Lord, I am your friend. You say, well, why did Peter not use that superlative verb, that verb that Jesus used? Because he had learned that he wasn't able to boast of a supreme love for God. Now, in verse 17, Jesus used the verb Peter used, so that's Peter was grieved. The third question, Simon, are you my friend? Now, the point is here that Peter was a changed man. What had changed him? His failure, his hard experience, his difficult experience, or we would say his experience in the school of hard knocks. Now, again, Jesus was not trying to embarrass him, but it was important for Peter to have to publicly acknowledge before his brethren his limitation. Now, the Lord assigned Peter the work of a pastor, which is to minister the word of God to his people at the differing levels of spiritual maturity. And see, a church of Jesus Christ is made up of all kinds of people of different levels of maturity. And so a pastor has to provide food, spiritual food for them, the Word of God, in suitable methods at a level they can handle. So it's like you can't feed a steak, though a pastor might want to feed steak to God's people. You can't always do that. You might choke people if they're not prepared to receive a higher level of teaching. So babies will choke on a steak, and kids, and so you might want to feed them filet mignon, but you have to end up feeding them a Happy Meal. What do we have here then? Jesus recovered Peter from great failure, from a lost and wasted life, and Peter became a recovered failure. What he thought might have disqualified him from useful service, the Lord used to temper him, to make him more compassionate, more understanding of others' weaknesses and failures. So we have a beautiful story that illustrates how God can take our mistakes, our mess-ups, our failures, and turn them to His glory and for the benefit of His child. There are many such examples in the Bible. But again, so often those things that we think disqualify us from useful service, the Lord will use them to change us and make us fit vessels for His use. So I hope that you find this lesson encouraging and helpful. And there's a lot more that we could talk about here, but I will leave it as it is. So thank you for joining me, and be sure to check out other videos I have on this channel. And the Lord bless you. Take care.